My holy brothers and sisters, how are we doing? I have got an amazing tale from the sages in our page today, and it's a pretty famous story, may I add. Okay, Nina is busy, quite busy, getting the house ready. So usually she shares the live show into the forum when it goes live. And where is it? I just need to be the one who shares it. There we go. Live. Where is it? How do I do this? Sorry, I'll be right with you. I just want to, here it is. So normally she's the one who shares into the forum, so I want to do that so people get notified. Okay, here we go. Share in a group. Accidental Talmudist Forum. And come on. Go. Bang. Okay. Shared it into the forum. Who's in the house? Joe Branson in the house from the Inland Empire. Robin Stewart says shalom from Ohio. How are you doing, my holy brothers and sisters? I've got the donate button on. A lot of people have actually been asking us. There's definitely a tradition to give tzedakah. Money to good causes as Passover approaches. It's a big merit. The best way to give, actually, it's good to give to us because you're supporting education and we're reaching all kinds of people that couldn't be reached any other way. And it is also good to give to people who would not have the money to have a nice meal for the Seder, right? So you want to give money for matzah, for wine, for all the different things that people should have at a Seder. So if you have a way to give that directly, you can. Rabbis always, most rabbis will make a collection from people in the community to give to the needy members of the community. And there's online sources for that as well. You can Google that. But if you'd like to support education through our page, the donate button is on. All right. So we are holding, and if you're on YouTube, I've got the link in there too where you can donate. Okay, we are holding on Daf Lamed Gimel, Daf 33 in Tractate Shabbos. We're in chapter 2, and we've been discussing the 6th Mishnah, and we're going to encounter an amazing story today, a very famous story from the Talmud. Let us acknowledge moms. There are so many moms around the country now with kids at home all day long, every day. Moms have become the teachers. Moms have become the everything. Moms are keeping the home sane to the best of their ability. And today we honor moms. So if you want to thank the moms of the world that are keeping the world together during this plague, hit that love button a whole bunch of times. We also want to dedicate today's learning to everybody who needs a healing. I'm very happy to report we've been praying for Rabbi Chaim Menachem Ben Leah in Jerusalem, the founder of the Breslov Research Institute, who was very ill. And today I got an email that he's doing much better. So thank you, God, for that healing. And may everyone who needs a healing from COVID or any other malady receive the healing they need. We dedicate today's learning to all of these people who need a healing. May they get the healing that they need speedily and soon. And may Chaim Menachem Ben Leah get a complete recovery. He's turned the corner, but may he have a complete healing. There we go. Okay, so we have been talking here in the 6th Mishnah, which was a difficult Mishnah to read, right? That women die in childbirth from neglecting 3 mitzvahs that are incumbent upon them. We discussed that yesterday. We talked about how while women are subject to those punishments, men are also subject to punishments, and that everybody needs to avoid danger, right? Because when you find yourself in danger, and illness is considered a danger, right? So in a moment of danger, in a time of illness, critical illness, so it's like you're being tried in heaven. It's like a heavenly trial is going on. And then at that moment, do you have enough merits so that you can survive that trial, right? And so you want to bring as many merits as possible to that heavenly trial. Definitely the judge is biased in our favor, right? So even if there's 999 angels bringing accusations of mistakes and omissions and even voluntary sins and evils that we've done, but there's one angel speaking on our behalf, will be spared, right? Most of the time. Now, there's a lot of Talmudic hyperbole going on. Thank you so much, James, for making that donation. Truly appreciate it. There's a lot of hyperbole, Talmudic hyperbole, and there's, of course, a lack of a one-to-one correlation between, people do some kind of a sin and people who receive such punishments, right? We know that innocent people are taken from this world. We know that innocent people get caught up in the evil of others, and they're just like the innocent bystander and could be taken from the world, when a storm hits evil people, right? So of course, it's not like because somebody is suffering, it means they did something wrong. But as we learned yesterday, if we find ourselves in a time of danger, if we find ourselves combating a serious illness, we can take upon ourselves to examine our deeds and say, you know what, from this terrible, bitter, difficult experience, I want to make meaning out of it. I want to make something new happen in my life. I want to move forward from this moment, with a change, with an improvement, with a project. And indeed, my friends, honestly, any of us who come out of this long isolation imposed by the COVID-19 plague, you've got to come out of this period with something new in your life, right? If not, it's like you wasted opportunity, right? So whether we fall ill or not, God forbid, every one of us avoid the plague. But the fact is, we've had this long pause in regular life, and it's ongoing. And we need to come out of this period with some reflection and some resolve and commitment to make something good come out of it for ourselves and our loved ones and our communities and the world. Okay. Let us continue. So in continuing to discuss this same Mishnah, our sages are going to list a bunch of punishments which can result from certain kinds of bad behavior, right? As we know, it's not that you do this bad behavior and the punishment immediately follows. The Torah doesn't work like that. The world doesn't work like that. If it did work like that, nobody would commit these wrongs, and there really wouldn't be free will, because the punishment would follow so hard on the heels of the bad behavior, we'd all be whipped into shape. But then we wouldn't have free will, and it wouldn't be this world, it would be some other world. But our sages are saying to us, the Torah has said, bad things will follow if we engage in these behaviors. And maybe we'll get away with it 20 times or 50 times or 100 times. But eventually, this trouble can befall us. And if we ever do, commit a wrong and get the punishment that we've been warned about, we can almost count that as a blessing, because it's like we were blessed to see that one-to-one quid pro quo. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen to everybody. But if we are actually witnessing that the punishment that was warned about followed on the heels of the sin that we were warned about, it's actually a blessing to witness that. All right. So among these punishments that our sages warn people will receive for doing certain kinds of sins, again, not a one-to-one correlation. The world doesn't work that way. But take the warning seriously, because when we do these things, demerits pile up. And we 100% believe that God is a just God. And so we may not see the justice ourselves. We may not see it in this lifetime. We may not see it in this world. But it comes. The world is absolutely just. We just can't always see it because it's such a, from God's point of view, such a complex watchwork. It's such a complex machinery to run this world, but he's running it. All right. So in terms of justice from human justice, right? In terms of a society having courts of law and administering a just society, our sages say that justice delayed, justice distorted, justice neglected, as well as dereliction of Torah study, which is associated with the dereliction of distributing justice in the world. Justice delayed, distorted, or neglected, and dereliction of Torah study leads to violence, looting, pestilence, famine, and that people eat and are not sated. If we look at the inner dimension of these sins and their punishments, we can actually see that it's not always that, okay, well, enough people, if people do these sins, then somehow a lightning bolt is going to come from heaven and, whip this punishment into them. Some of these punishments actually naturally follow, right? If you've got a corrupt justice system, it's not going to be that surprising that violence and looting and pestilence associated with filth are going to follow. It's not that surprising. Our sages say that oaths in vain and false oaths, right? So swearing, in the name of heaven to something that is false, or taking an oath that was not necessary. That's an oath in vain. Or God forbid, desecrating God's name, right? Being a religious person and committing a public sin, that's a desecration of God's name. And desecrating Shabbos, this would be for a Jew, right? Only a Jew is commanded in the Ten Commandments to keep Shabbos. So for these sins, wild beasts abound, domestic animals perish, roads become desolate, and human beings decrease. Now, this actually sounds remarkably like the time that we're living in. Human beings decrease, the roads become desolate, wild beasts abound. Have you seen those videos of the monkeys running wild now that the tourists are gone? I think it's in Thailand, and there's just like thousands of monkeys swarming the streets that are hungry. Usually they're fed by tourists, and now they're going nuts because the streets are empty. Who knows? Perhaps we should, right? So when we see these things happen in the world, we should ask ourselves, was I one of the people that was adding, right, to false oaths, to swearing in God's name, to being somebody who was, visibly acting in an unholy way in public, right? Was I one of the people adding to that? Let me make sure that I'm not one of them, right? For the sins of prohibited sexual relations, idol worship, violation of Shemitah, which is leaving the land fallow, not planting in the 7th year, that's a commandment only in Israel when the temple is standing, right? So the Shemitah prohibitions are when the temple is standing. So this was about ancient Israel. So the punishment in ancient Israel, when enough of the people were engaging in prohibited sexual relations, idol worship, violating Shemitah, the punishment was exile. 2 kinds of exile. Exile of the Jewish people from the Jewish Holy Land, and it happened, and exile of all the humans. Right? What does that mean? Exile of all the humans. What it means is that when the temple stood, God had a home in the world. Right? God had a specific home in the world that he had commanded that it should be built, and it was built. And then the people could bring offerings there, not just the Jewish people, but the whole world could bring offerings in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. But when the Jewish people, when their level of sins rose high enough, that we lost it. We lost the right to have a temple. We lost the right to have the Holy Land be our own. And then not only did the Jewish people lose the Jewish homeland 2,000 years ago, but the world lost that, visible physical home for God in this world. Vulgar speech. how vulgar has our society become? I mean, it's just gotten to the place where people curse on TV, politicians curse, politicians are vulgar. You know, is it so old-fashioned to say that we should speak in a more refined way? Is it so old-fashioned? Is it so unreasonable to say let's elevate our speech and not be vulgar? So our sages say that the punishment for vulgar speech is that troubles abound, harsh decrees are renewed, youth among the enemies of Israel perish. And when our sages say the enemies of Israel, that is a euphemism for Israel. Orphans and widows cry out for help in vain. Again, this is one of those things that if you think about it, it's not a lightning bolt from heaven. These are things that naturally follow. When speech is coarse, what follows speech is actually thoughts, emotions, and actions, right? The way we speak affects the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act. So as a culture, as we become coarse, we actually become hardened and less sensitive to the needs of the needy, right? And so orphans and widows cry out for help in vain. Rabbi Hanan bar Rava said, everyone knows why a bride goes under the wedding canopy, right? In other words, they're saying everyone knows what happens on the wedding night between a bride and a groom. To talk about it is vulgar, is unnecessary, right? See how careful they are to refine their speech. And so he's saying that everyone knows what goes on in there. If we feel the need to talk about it, we make our speech coarse, and it leads to terrible things happening in this world. Rachista says that people who engage in vulgar speech, they deepen Gehenna for him. Right? Gehenna is like purgatory. Gehenna is the place where you go to have your sins refined out of your soul after you die. It's temporary. But, you know, and you actually, our sages teach that you won't spend more than a year in Gehenna. But a year in Gehenna could feel like an eternity. We want to avoid that at all costs. Okay. And that brings us to this very, very famous story in which a contagion, and it was a very particular kind of contagion, which I'll explain in a moment, not a virus, a spiritual contagion, if you will, led to a 12-year quarantine for Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Elazar. What happened? So, it happened once. There was an incident that some rabbis were learning in the study hall, right? So the teachers here, the sages in the study hall, were Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosei, and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Shimon the son of Yochai. Among the students that day was a guy named Yehuda, right? Not Rabbi Yehuda, just Yehuda. Now this Yehuda was in some very august company, right? It was not like a big class that the three teachers were in front of a big seminar. It was like a small group, and Yehuda was included in that group. So he was a very well-respected student. And incidentally, it mentions that Yehuda was the son of converts, right? So even though he didn't have this long-standing background, right, he grew up among converts. And yet his learning was well enough respected that he got into this kind of inner circle of the sages. Rabbi Yehuda said, how pleasant are the actions of this nation. Now, we're talking about the period after the Jews have lost the temple. They're still living in the Holy Land, not all of them, sort of like a remnant. We've lost the temple, but we're living under the dominion of the Roman Empire. There's plenty of Jews still there, but we don't have sovereignty in our own land. We live under the thumb of Rome, okay? And Rabbi Yehuda says, well, how pleasant are the actions of this nation, meaning Rome. They build bathhouses, marketplaces, and bridges. And it is true that Rome was a nation of an empire of builders. I mean, the Roman Empire, most of the places that it went to, although it was quite totalitarian, you had no say in the matter if you were a nation ruled by Rome. And if you were Roman, unless you were of the aristocratic class, you had no say in anything. It was not a democracy. But the fact is, they improved from a material point of view the lives of many people in the vast Roman Empire, sort of brought them into the modern age, if you will, by building marketplaces, bridges, and bathhouses. Rabbi Yehuda said that. Rabbi Yochai was silent. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who knew all too well what Rome had done. This was the nation that destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, after all. This was the nation that killed many sages. This was a nation that taxed people, that enslaved people, that did tremendous wrong. And Shimon bar Yochai heard this comment of Rabbi Yehuda and said, well, all these material blessings that you're talking about is nothing. It is not in any way meant by the Romans to bless their subjects. All these things that they do only for themselves. The bathhouses that they build to pamper themselves. The bridges that they build is so that they can install toll collectors on them and tax people who are on the road and get money from them to send to Rome. And the bridges and the marketplaces that they build is so that they can bring prostitutes into the marketplace and then tax the fees that the prostitutes receive while they're corrupting the people. There's nothing good about these Romans, said Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Now, this fellow, Yehuda, their student, he went home and he shared the statements of the sages in the study hall. Who did he share it with? Unclear. But he was sharing information that clearly could endanger Shimon bar Yochai. Right? If you say outside of the study hall that somebody in the study hall was critical of an authoritarian, totalitarian, dangerous regime, well, then obviously you're spreading negative information that could hurt somebody. And that is lashon hara. That's a form of evil tongue, evil speech. Normally we think of lashon hara as gossip. And gossip is absolutely prohibited. But sharing any kind of information that could harm a person is prohibited as evil speech, as lashon hara, right? So in this case, what was said in the study hall should have stayed in the study hall, but it didn't. So the student Yehuda shared it outside of the study hall, and what happened? It spread around that Shimon bar Yochai had spoken against the government, and people who didn't care for Shimon bar Yochai or who wanted to curry favor with the Roman authorities reported the statement to the Roman authority. And the Roman authorities issued their decree in response. So about Rabbi Yehuda, who praised the Roman government for building things that are useful. Let me get this in front of me. I just want to get the decree correct. Yes, so the Roman authorities decreed that Yehuda, who elevated the Roman regime, shall be elevated and appointed as the head of the sages. Right? You could see, shouldn't the sages appoint their own head of sages? But the Romans, they just do whatever they want. So they made Rabbi Yehuda the head of the sages. They decreed. Rabbi Yochai, who remained silent, shall be exiled from his home in Judea as a punishment and sent to the city of Tzipori in the Galilee. And Shimon bar Yochai, who denounced the Roman regime, was sentenced to die, to be executed. So Shimon went into hiding, and his son Elazar went into hiding with him. At first, they hid in the study hall, and Shimon's wife, Elazar's mom, brought them food and whatever they needed. But then Shimon thought to himself, we're endangering my wife. She could get caught. They could torture her to find out where we are. Much better she doesn't know where we are. So they ran off and they hid in a cave, a deep cave where no one else could find them. Now, in this cave, a miracle was performed for them, and a spring arose at the mouth of the cave, and a carob tree grew in front of the cave so that they would have food to eat. And they hid in this cave for their lives, right? Because if Shimon bar Yochai was found anywhere by anyone and turned into the Roman authority, he would be executed. Tortured and executed, let me add. So they hid in this cave due to the contagion of lashon hara, right? Spreading that like viral evil speech, right? That spread around, led to this happening. And they hid in that cave for 12 years. What did they do in the cave for 12 years, you might wonder? First of all, they knew that they were only going to have the clothes on their back. No one knew where they were, so nobody was going to bring them anything. So to preserve the clothes that they had on their back, they took them off during the day. They covered themselves in sand out of, modesty, and so they wouldn't be cold, I imagine. And they learned Torah all day long. I don't think they had it. They probably didn't have any sforim with them, any books, but they were extremely well versed in the oral Torah. And so they had enough from their memory to study and to learn and to discuss together. And they studied Torah all day long, from morning until night. And they only put their clothes on to pray, right? Because when you pray, you need to be dressed properly. From that verse, prepare Israel to meet your God. From there, we learn that a person should be dressed properly to pray. So morning, afternoon, and evening, they put on their clothes, prayed, then went back in, took off the clothes, sort of buried themselves in the sand, and talked Torah back and forth for 12 years. Now, you should know that the tradition says that the Zohar, right, the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, was authored by Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, right? The Zohar itself wasn't sort of put together and published until 1,000 years later in Spain. But its writer at that time attributed sort of, the core teachings of the Zohar to Shimon bar Yochai. So where did all that knowledge that became the core of the Jewish mystical tradition come from? From a man who spent 12 years studying Torah in a cave with his son. You can imagine that they plumbed these depths in a way that no one else could, because they had no distraction in their lives. And they didn't just kill time in the cave. They used that quarantine with no social media and no visiting back and forth and no distraction of any kind. They used it as wisely as they possibly could and unearthed incredible mystical truths. After 12 years, somebody walked by that cave talking with a friend, and he was called Elijah, not because it was the prophet Elijah, but because he was the bearer of good news. He didn't even know it was good news, but he was just hiking by, talking with a friend, and said, I wonder who's ever going to find or tell Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai that the emperor that issued under whose authority the decree was issued of execution for him, for Shimon, that emperor is dead. And the decree is abrogated, right? When a new emperor comes in, those kinds of decrees were torn up. And so it was now safe for Shimon bar Yochai and Elazar to emerge from the cave. And they heard that conversation as the people walked by, and they're like, oh, wow, we can come out. Now, when they came out, you can imagine that these were people completely separated from society for 12 years and fully immersed in mysticism and divining the secrets that are possible for a human to know of the mystical wonders of the world. And when they came out and they just saw farmers farming, and they thought, what are these people doing? They're working so hard. They're spending all day just, creating the stuff that people need in this world and farming and, putting various foods in the marketplace and, harvesting fibers, flax, right, that you can make clothing out of. It's all unnecessary. We lived in a cave, we ate what came off a tree, and we plumbed the depths of the universe with that time. Why would anybody spend time, just making a living? It's terrible, it's ridiculous. They were offended by it. And everywhere they looked, it was like they had achieved such a high mystical state that their gaze, it was like Superman's X-ray vision. Like what they looked at would burn up. And they were so angry that people were wasting time in this way. And then a voice came from heaven and said, what I created, you seek to burn up? Go back to your cave. That's how God felt about Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar's angry attitude about people wasting their time making a living. God sent them back in the cave. Like they didn't get it. They learned all these mystical secrets, but they didn't get what life is really all about. Back in the cave they went. After a year, Shimon Bar Yochai said, well, even a person who's lived a life full of sin, 1 year is enough for them to be refined, for the soul to be refined in Gehenna. So I put in another year in the cave. And the voice from heaven came down and said, okay, emerge from the cave. They came out of the cave. Elazar, the son, was still angry that people aren't engaging in Torah study all the time. But wherever his gaze would burn, Shimon's gaze would heal. Shimon had got the lesson, right? He needed to teach it to his son. But Shimon Bar Yochai, he got the lesson. And then they saw a farmer running by carrying 2 bundles of myrtle. And Shimon asked him, where are you going? And he said, well, what do you mean, where am I going? It's Erev Shabbos. Shabbos is about to come in. I'm running to prepare for Shabbos. And this myrtle, and these myrtles are for Shabbos. And Shimon said, well, the myrtles that you've got, 1 bundle would suffice for Shabbos. Why do you have 2? And the man said, what are you talking about? We were commanded to remember Shabbos and to keep Shabbos, right? To honor the Shabbos by remembering it and to observe its commandments, to remember and to guard Shabbos. 2 separate commandments about Shabbos. And then the man ran off. And then Shimon said, do you see how beloved the mitzvahs are? That a man who spends his whole week just making a living and working, we thought that he wasn't doing the right thing, but he loves God, he loves the commandments. This is a nation doing what it is supposed to do. And that's what we needed to learn. And his son then understood, and they returned into the world. Now, having had that experience, both of plumbing the mystical secrets of the universe and understanding that what this life is about is enjoying this world and making a living properly and fulfilling our obligations and not hiding out in a cave and being an ascetic, right? Judaism rejects asceticism. It is not an ascetic religion. Judaism is about enjoying the fruits of this world. In fact, we have a tradition that when our soul goes to heaven, for every permitted pleasure which we never sampled, we will have to answer why we did not participate and try out that permitted pleasure. We are meant to enjoy this world. So having learned all that, Shimon Bar Yochai said, okay, you know what? I'm so grateful. I survived the decree of execution. I learned so much during my 12 years in the cave, and I learned even more during that extra year when I came to see that the world is not for retreating from. There's a place for mysticism, that's for sure, and I loved what I learned, but this life is for living, not for just, tripping on the mystical secrets alone in a cave. And I'm so grateful for what I've learned that I want to do something for the world, right? A public work project. Almost like, in the Boy Scouts, to become an Eagle Scout, you have to perform a public service project. You have to build a bench in a park, or you have to build a path that people can enjoy, a hiking path, something like that. You have to create something for the public. And so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wanted to create something for the public. What would he do? And he realized that there was some problems where there were areas near the town where he was living where it was uncertain whether there was a field that had a dead body in it or not. And because it was uncertain, people who were Kohanim, priests, right, the priest class, couldn't walk through those areas because like a Kohen cannot walk into a cemetery, nor can he walk over a field that might have a dead body buried in it, that maybe it was plowed over and little pieces of the bones spread around the field. And because of this uncertainty, there were actually paths that a lot of people were using, but that Kohanim couldn't take because of this uncertainty whether some dead bodies had rested under those paths. So he took upon himself to research thoroughly, okay, what dead bodies have been buried anywhere in the surroundings, where were they, what is certain, what is uncertain. And by doing the methodical research, he was able to figure out which paths were safe and which were not in terms of ritual impurity from a corpse. And it was a lovely thing to do, and it benefited a lot of people. One smart alecky, skeptical elder, right, an older person who should have known better and appreciated what the Rashbi had done, instead laughed at him and said, you know what you did? You purified a cemetery, right? Meaning that he didn't trust that what Rashbi had done actually was possible or beneficial, and he mocked it, right? You can't purify a cemetery. Obviously, a cemetery has dead bodies all over it. And this guy was of the opinion that the task that Shimon Bar Yochai had undertaken was an impossible one. He shouldn't have tried to do it. But Shimon Bar Yochai did it properly, and he knew it was a good thing. And he looked at this mocker, this skeptic, and he fixed that gaze on him. And, he learned his lesson about not using his withering gaze where it doesn't belong, but on somebody who mocked him when he was doing important Torah-based work. So that's somebody who maybe deserves a hard look. And a hard look from Shimon Bar Yochai is fatal. And that elder died. And then he was walking the marketplace later, and he ran into that student Yehuda, whose lashon hara, reporting what had been said in the study hall, led to this whole 12-year exile into the cave, the 12-year quarantine in the cave, right? This Yehuda who spoke what shouldn't have been spoken and told people what Shimon had said in the study hall criticizing the Roman regime. And Shimon Bar Yochai looked at this guy and said, there is still a place for you in this world? And with him, he was so angry that his look at this student, that now, much older man, but a look at this guy was enough to reduce him to a pile of bones. Make of the story what you will. I would say that there's several takeaways here. One is, we do not repeat people's opinions, period, right? But particularly opinions that could rebound on them and hurt them, right? I mean, if we're engaged in learning with people in a safe atmosphere, right? Like, are we safe? Is this a safe place to talk? Can we share our political opinions? Beautiful. So we create a safe space for that kind of a discussion. If you then turn around and report what somebody said, and it's in a way that's going to get them in trouble, that's lashon hara. It is a contagion, and it can result in big, big trouble. You don't do that. Secondly, don't anger a sage. That's the bottom line. Do not anger a sage. Somebody that spends all their time immersed in matters of heaven, it's a very holy person. That is not somebody that we want to upset. Period. End of story. That's what I've got for us today. Tomorrow we'll be opening with a Mishnah, a new Mishnah, about 3 things that a person must say in his home on the eve of Shabbat. It's about preparing for Shabbat. And tomorrow night is Passover. So I don't know. I don't think we're going to be so busy preparing for Passover. We're busy today, busy tomorrow even more. I might try to do 2 pages tomorrow, but I suspect that I will not be able to. And so then we're going to have a 3-day hog, right? We're going to have Thursday, Friday, and then Shabbat. So there's going to be 3 days when I can't go live. I'm a page ahead of the Daf Yomi schedule. So I think, but then during the 3 days, we're going to come out and I'll probably be a page behind. And at some point, I'll do 2 pages in 1 day, and then we'll be caught up. And then I'll try another time, God willing, to do 2 pages in 1 day again. And then we'll get back to where we are now, which is 1 day ahead of the schedule. I like to keep a day ahead of the schedule, so if people want to have this available, if they study in the morning or learn in the morning, it's available for them. But when we come out of Passover, we can expect to be a little bit behind. Tomorrow, if you're Jewish and you're the firstborn of your mom, and you're a male, so you have an obligation to fast. It's a daytime fast. But if you are completing a tractate of study, or you join somebody who is completing a tractate of study, then the celebration of that siyum, that completion of a cycle of study, actually exempts you from the fast. So tomorrow, I think I'm probably going to do this about 9:30 or 10 a.m. Pacific. I'm going to be making a siyum on tractate Mishnah Pesachim. So the Mishnah on the laws of Pesach. And I've been studying that for the last 9 days. And so tomorrow I'm going to complete that. A tractate of Mishnah, it's just the Mishnahs, right? So it's much shorter than a tractate of Talmud. But, you know, it's still significant. And so I'm going to be doing that at 10. So if you are a firstborn and you want to get out of fasting from sun up until sundown, you can attend that live show. Look for it at about, it's going to be between 9:30 and 10 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday. Tonight we'll be finishing the clean out of the chametz from our homes, of any kinds of crumbs of leavened bread and any other related things. And then we're going to inspect our homes by candlelight, right? We're going to go around tonight, inspect our home with a candle, find the last few crumbs, and then we can declare that our home is chametz free. And spiritually speaking, when we do that, spiritually speaking, when we do that, we're looking in each room for the leavening, for the puffed upness, for the arrogance that we engaged in that room. We ask ourselves, was I ever arrogant in this room? Yes, I was. I want to clean that out of this room and of my soul and of my family, and try to head into Pesach with a truly clean home and a clean bill and ready, to be free of our pharaohs, as we've discussed on previous shows. All right, my friends, that's what I've got. Thank you all for attending, and I look forward, God willing, to see you tomorrow. Just check, were there any comments there? No.